Now let's welcome our second presenter, Bernardo Candia from UC Berkeley. He is also very productive. He already has a publication at top journals like Econometrica, JEA, GME, and Handbook contribution. Today he's going to present his job market paper on inflation expectation and household spending. Now, without further ado, Bernardo, the floor is all yours.
Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. It is Saturday. I present my paper, Inflation Expectations and Household Spending, Different Patterns in Low and High Inflation Settings. Okay, what is the motivation for this? In my paper, I studied the relationship between inflation expectations and spending decisions. This is a key policy question for many central banks recently, and the answer to this question is not straightforward. Standard theory predicts that households should increase consumption today in anticipation of higher prices in the future. Given a fixed nominal interest rate, an increase in inflation expectations should decrease the perceived real interest rate, reducing savings and stimulating consumption. But in reality, households associate higher inflation with a worse economic outlook. So a rise in inflation expectations should lead households to reduce spending. Which of these forces dominates? This is at the core of my paper. So how inflation expectations affect spending is a relevant empirical question. And when you analyze available evidence, you can find seemingly inconsistent results. For example, Diacunto, Hong, and Weber, using an anticipated change in the VAT in Germany, they find a positive link between inflation expectations and durable spending. In contrast, Koevion, Gorodnichenko, and Weber, 2022, using an RCT, they find a negative relationship. Then in my paper, I show you that how inflation expectations affect spending depends on the inflation environment. I use a multiple randomized control trial applied to US households participating in the Nielsen-Scan panel between 2018 to 2023. Importantly, this is a time period with low inflation and high inflation. To produce exogenous variation in the inflation expectations of households, we give to random subsets of households information about inflation. For example, we tell them past inflation or the inflation target. Then I start showing you that these information treatments are effective moving around the inflation expectations of households. And then I use this exogenous generated variation to provide causal evidence on how inflation expectations affect spending. I would like to emphasize here that a randomized control trial allows a clear variation in the inflation expectations, because causality can also run from household spending to inflation expectations. For example, if households increase their spending due to, better financial conditions, they could infer that other households will spend more, pushing prices up and rising inflation expectations. So the point here is RCT is great to generate variation in beliefs. Now, what do I find with this exogenous variation? I find a negative relationship between inflation expectations and durable spending in times of low inflation. In times of high inflation, I find completely the opposite. Households with higher inflation expectations are more likely to have purchased a durable good. Okay. Then, how can one rationalize this result? I already hinted you an explanation, but the RCT itself is not enough. Indeed, my instrumental variable approach yields a total estimate on how inflation expectations affect spending. But exogenously, higher inflation expectations may induce several channels that can make consumption move in different directions. So I use data from the Michigan Survey of Consumers, Nielsen, and the New York Fed Survey of Consumer Expectations to analyze these channels under different inflation environments. And in my paper, I argue that the intertemporal substitution channel in which households want to move their spending of durable goods forward in anticipation of higher prices in the future becomes stronger in times of high inflation, while the income uncertainty channel, in which households associate higher inflation to a worse state of the economy, does not vary with the level of inflation. Also, I provide causal evidence that households do not associate changes in inflation expectations to changes in nominal interest rate expectations. Then, what is happening here is that in times of high inflation, liquid nominal assets like money becomes less attractive to households. And households want to protect their purchasing power by buying a real asset like a durable good. Then I developed a simple model, extremely simple model, with liquid and real assets and consumption goods. And I show you that there is a U-shaped relationship between durable goods over liquid assets and the level of inflation. That is what I do in the paper. Okay. Now, going to the empirical part. Fundamental to my empirical strategy are the information treatments that generate exogenous variation in the inflation expectations of households. I rely on 6 RCTs applied to US households participating in Nielsen between 2018 to 2023. Nielsen is a nationally representative survey. It has a large sample size and it contains information about durable and non-durable spending. Okay, so Nielsen is great. Then the goal of the RCT is to generate variation in the inflation expectations of households. So the setup of the RCT is the following. First, we measure prior beliefs of all households using a distributional question for 1 year ahead inflation expectations. Okay. Then we randomly split the sample between control group and treatment groups. The treatment group received information about inflation. Specifically, I focus on 3 types of information treatments. The inflation over past year, the inflation target of the Federal Reserve, and the inflation forecast of the Federal Open Market Committee. The control group does not receive any additional information, okay? And then we measure posterior beliefs of all households using a point forecast question about 1 year ahead inflation expectations. So here you have a graphical representation of the experiment. So for example, the first RCT was run in 2018 Q2, okay? The second RCT was run in 2021 Q2. The black line is the actual level of inflation. The red line is the average expected inflation of household. And for example, the blue circle is the information that we provide in the past inflation treatment. The green triangle is the information that we provide in the Fed target treatment, always equal to 2%, okay? And the yellow square is the information that we provide in the Fed forecast treatment, okay? I hope it is clear, the setup of the experiment. Then,
So I have 2 questions before we move on. So first question is, who implemented this experiment? Is that the Nielsen itself has this data, or you just use their network to do a survey yourself?
no, basically I use my advisor gave me access to this data because I've been working with him since 2018.
Right. So the Nielsen has this data, but it's not public. It's just your advisor has this.
Exactly, but you know, I had to sign a contract to get access
Right.
to, and in order to get independence, okay, to write papers.
Right. And another question is, so here you show the treatment with different treatment, how it changed the inflation. But where is the control group?
Sorry?
So you have this like circles, a triangle, square, so which shows this treatment with different information. But
Exactly.
then the question is where is the control group, which means you
Oh,
didn't.
the control group does not receive any information.
Okay. So this is not their expected inflation. This is the treatment you give to the
The red line, okay,
is
the red line is the average expected inflation of household.
but it's everybody, including both the
Exactly.
control.
Exactly.
Okay.
Previous to information treatments. Okay.
Okay. I see.
Okay. So if a household were to respond as Bayesians, their beliefs should be a weighted average between their initial beliefs and the signal that they receive. Intuitively, posterior beliefs should relate to prior beliefs and the information treatment according to this equation, where G is the Kalman gain, which captures how informative a signal is perceived. Then, we should observe convergence in beliefs captured by a reduction in the cross-sectional posterior inflation expectations after the information provision. And to analyze the effects of information treatments on inflation expectations, I ran a regression of the posterior inflation expectations on the prior inflation expectations, a dummy variable for being treated with treatment J, and the interaction between the treatment and the prior inflation expectations. Okay, so here beta represents the relationship between prior and posterior of the control group. Delta captures the level effects of the information treatment. It may be positive or negative, depending on how the prior inflation expectations compare to the information treatment. And gamma captures the change of the relationship between priors and posterior. Okay, if gamma equals 0, the information treatment has no effects on beliefs. A negative gamma indicates that households are placing weight towards the information that they receive. More negative gamma, more informative the signal is perceived. Notice also that the absolute value of gamma represents that the weight that household placed to the signal, that is the Kalman gain. Then I ran this regression, and here I'm showing you results for the Fed target treatment, okay? The columns show you results for each RCT, okay? Always, in all my tables, I'll show you the actual level of inflation at the top, okay? What is relevant here is the coefficient gamma, how informative the signal is perceived, okay? And for all the waves, I find a negative and statistically significant coefficient gamma, okay? Meaning that households consistently revise their beliefs toward the information they receive. But, in times of high inflation, for example, look at the third RCT, households respond less to the provided information. But the point that I want to make with this table is that the information treatments are effective moving around the inflation expectations of household. It is also interesting to see the average effects of information treatments on household inflation expectations under different inflation environments. And to do that, I regress the change in the inflation expectations on a dummy variable for the treatment group. And here the coefficient B captures the average effects of receiving the treatment relative to the control group. And in this table, I show you the results for the coefficient B, okay? In general, prior beliefs are greater than the information provided in the treatment. So households, on average, revise their inflation expectations downward. One exception will be past inflation in 2022 quarter three, okay? Households in this group were told that past inflation was 8.5%. But the average expected inflation was 6.9%. So on average, households in this group revised their expectations upward. Also, notice that the effects across treatment groups are similar when we provide a similar inflation number to household, suggesting that households do not differentiate across these conceptually different metrics. For example, here you can see, look at the first RCT. You can see that the numbers provided for past inflation, inflation target, and inflation forecast are very similar. And all these three treatment groups revised their inflation expectations by a similar proportion. Okay. Okay, this is the point that I want to make here is that my information treatments are effective moving around the inflation expectations of household. And now I want to use this exogenous generated variation to provide causal evidence on how inflation expectations affect spending under different inflation environments. Okay. And to do that, I rely on measures of spending coming from the follow-up wave run 1 quarter after the information provision. So, for example, if the RCT was run in 2018 quarter 2, then I measure spending in 2018 quarter 3. Okay, and household in Nielsen report whether they had purchased a durable good in the previous 6 months, and I consider houses, cars, and big items. Also, they report the amount of spending on those durable goods. And also, they report the average monthly spending on food, debt and rent payments, and other goods and services. Okay. From this, I can get the total non-consumption, non-durable consumption spending. Okay. Okay. To analyze the link between inflation expectations and consumption, I rely on an instrumental variable strategy that uses the information treatments to produce exogenous variation in the inflation expectations. I start analyzing the extensive margin of durable goods. I run a regression of an indicator variable for household I, reporting purchases of large durable goods on the posterior inflation expectations, controlling for prior inflation expectations in an indicator variable indicating whether the household has planned to purchase any large durable good, and a vector of household controls. And I instrument for the posterior inflation expectations using the equation that I showed you previously, augmented with the purchase plan and the vector of household controls. And now I'm going to show you the coefficient on the posterior inflation expectations, the coefficient beta. Okay. So you can see that there is a significant variation over time in the estimates of how inflation expectations affect durable good purchases. For example, the first RCT was run in 2018 quarter 2 when inflation was 2.5%. In this RCT, I find that a 1 percentage point increase in inflation expectations reduces the probability of a household having purchased a durable good by 1.2 percentage points. Okay, but then when inflation started to rise, we observe a completely different pattern. For example, in 2021 quarter 2, when inflation was 4.9%, I find a positive relationship between durable spending and inflation expectations. Then in 2022 quarter three, when inflation was 8.2%, I find an even stronger relationship. Then the inflation rate started to decline, and the relationship becomes weaker, but it is still positive. And a last RCT was run in 2023 quarter three, when inflation was again under 4%, and I find that households with higher inflation expectations are less likely to have purchased a durable good. Okay. Then I focus in the amount of spending, dollars. Okay. And I run an IVW regression of the logarithm of 1 plus the spending in durable goods on the posterior inflation expectations, controlling for planned spending, and using the same instrumenting strategy for inflation expectations as before, and consistent to what I found before. You can see that in times of low inflation, for example, the first and the last RCT, there is a negative relationship between inflation expectations and total durable spending. And in times of high inflation, there is a positive relationship between inflation expectations and durable spending. Finally, I focus.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
I think your finding actually shows some kind of like asymmetrical effects, right? So how this the relationship between the inflation expectation and spending depends on whether you are in a low inflation environment or
Or
a
high
high.
inflation environment.
Right. But then that kind of makes me think, okay, there could be some non-linearity there. But your findings all depends on all comes from like linear regressions. So basically, my question is, well, in this low inflation environment, a high inflation environment, well, maybe the true data generating process is a nonlinear relationship. Then if you use a linear regression to get these coefficients, whether these coefficients can be misestimated.
You know, I think that I need to think more about it, but basically to rationalize what I get in my RCT evidence, I explore all the channels through which inflation expectations can affect durable spending, basically.
Right. That's what you find, and you find, okay, in low inflation environment, it's a negative relationship. In high inflation environment, it's a positive relationship. But then, like the results you get is you categorize it. So some of the periods are the low inflation environment, some of the periods are high inflation environment. But then the question is if the relationship itself is non-linear, but all your results are from linear regression. So I kind of think that have a little bit thought about this, right?
No, but you know, at the end,
Right.
what you are seeing in each regression is how an exogenous rise in inflation expectations affect your durable spending.
Right. Yeah, we can see that. We can see that. I'm just saying if it's okay, or if it's possible to do some robustness analysis to see, okay, whether the results are still there, if you allow for some types of non-linearity there.
Yes, honestly, I need to think more about it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, finally, I focus on spending on non-durable goods. And then I run a regression of the log of total non-durable goods spending on the posterior inflation expectations, controlling for the average monthly spending over the previous 3 months. And of course, I use the same instrumenting strategy as before, and I find a weak response of spending on non-durable goods to changes in inflation expectations. And this does not depend on the level of inflation. Then, now I need to try to explain my results, to rationalize the RCT evidence, and because high inflation expectations may induce these several channels that can make consumption move in different directions. So if you think about a general consumption function, like those coming from the income fluctuation problem, okay, consumption today depends on preferences, the expected path of real interest rate or rate of returns, the expected path of real income, and your initial wealth, okay? So a rise in inflation expectations has a direct impact on the perceived real interest rate. An increase in inflation expectations reduces the relative price of current consumption, reducing savings, and increasing consumption. And the increase in consumption should be higher, should be stronger for durable goods, because a household can easily substitute durable purchases over time. I call this mechanism the intertemporal substitution channel, okay? Also, a household associate higher inflation to a worse economic outlook. Then, an increase in inflation expectations can affect the expected path of real income. For example, you can expect a lower real income. You can think that the probability of being unemployed in the future is higher, or there is more income uncertainty, okay? I call this channel the negative income uncertainty channel. Also, moving around the inflation expectations of a household, it can affect the nominal interest rate expectations. If you think, for example, that the central bank follows a Taylor rule, then I evaluate these channels under different inflation environments, okay? And I start analyzing the income uncertainty channel, and I proceed in 4 steps. First, I use the Michigan Survey of Consumers because it has a long sample period to show you that there is a stable relationship between unemployment rate expectations and inflation expectations. Then I use the information treatments in Nielsen to provide causal evidence on how inflation expectations affect unemployment rate expectations. And also I get a stable relationship. Then I show you that households extrapolate aggregate conditions to their personal conditions. In particular, I use Nielsen again to show you that households extrapolate unemployment rate expectations to their own labor market conditions. And finally, I use the New York Fed Survey of Consumer Expectations to show you that an increase in inflation expectations is associated to a reduction in the same proportion, 1-for-1, in real income growth expectations. So I start using Michigan, okay? Michigan has a quantitative question about inflation expectations and a qualitative question about unemployment expectations over the next 12 months. Households in this survey report whether they expect unemployment to be more than now, the same, or less than now in the next year, okay? Then I code more than 1 as 1, the same as 0 and less than 1 as -1. Then I regress, after taking out time fixed effects, okay, I regress unemployment expectations on inflation expectations, both in level and using 6 months revisions, because the Michigan has a panel component, okay? And I do it for the full sample, see the first column, and also I split the sample into different sample periods. And regardless of the sample period or level of inflation, households that predict higher inflation also tend to expect a higher unemployment rate. And the correlation is stable over time, and it remains statistically significant even after controlling by household fixed effects. If I do the same for professional forecaster, I find that they hold a demand-driven view of inflation, where high inflation is associated to a lower unemployment rate. Okay. Then I go beyond this correlational approach, and I use the information treatments in Nielsen to provide causal evidence on how inflation expectations affect unemployment rate expectations. Several survey waves elicit unemployment rate expectations before and after the information provision. Okay, the prior is a point forecast question about unemployment rate expectations in 12 months, and the posterior is a point forecast question for unemployment rate expectations at the end of the next year. So they are, similar questions. And then,
hi Bernardo, can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
So what? I'm just curious why only half of the households are asked to provide the point estimate, but instead of all the households to provide the estimates for the unemployment before the RTP.
Yes, basically, I elicit expectations, unemployment expectations before and after the information provision for all the households.
Yes, but I'm just curious. You're saying that only half of the household in the sample were asked to provide the point forecast.
Sorry, I forgot that detail. Because for half of the household, we asked about unemployment rate expectations in the next 12 months, and for the other half, we asked about in the next 5 years. So basically, we were saving space in the questionnaire, but we wanted to elicit both expectations. But here I'm using unemployment rate expectations in the next 12 months. Is it clear?
Okay, yeah, thanks.
Okay. Then I regress posterior unemployment expectations on the posterior inflation expectations using the same instrumenting strategy as always, and consistent to supply side view of inflation. When households raise their inflation expectations, they also tend to expect a higher unemployment rate, but the economic magnitude, the size, is relatively small. A 1 percentage point increase in inflation expectations lead households to increase their unemployment expectations by around 0.1 to 0.2 percentage points. And notice that regardless of the level of inflation, the effects of higher inflation expectations on unemployment expectations is relatively stable over time. Then, one potential concern is that households do not extrapolate IRA conditions to their personal conditions. And now I'm going to show you that that is not true, okay? And here you can see a bin scatter between the expected probability of losing my job over the next 12 months and the aggregate, expected inflation. And you can see a clear positive relationship. Then I use the quantitative questions about income growth expectations and inflation expectations in the New York Fed Survey of Consumer Expectations to show you that when households increase their inflation expectations, they also tend to reduce their real income growth expectations in the same proportion, 1-for-1. Okay. Okay. Now, that is with the income uncertainty channel. Now I explore the intertemporal substitution channel. And I use Michigan again to provide narrative evidence coming from the time series for spending attitudes. Specifically, in times of high inflation, households report that today is a good time to buy a durable good because prices will increase. Okay, this is important because households are giving you the reason. Okay, so sometimes you just need to ask to people. Okay, in times of low inflation, no one is reporting that today is a good time to buy a durable good because prices will increase. Then I use the cross-section differences in inflation expectations to show you that households with higher inflation expectations are more likely to say that today is a good time to buy a durable good because prices will increase. Okay. Okay, since 1978, Michigan has collected opinion about whether it is a good or bad time to buy durable goods, and in particular, if it is a good or bad time to buy a large household durable, a car, or houses. Okay, and also household report the reasons supporting their opinions about buying conditions. For example, a household can report that now is a good time to buy a car because the interest rates are low, or because prices are low, or because prices will increase. Okay. So here, among the people that report that now it is a good time to buy a durable good, I plot the time series of the share of people providing a specific reason to support their spending attitudes. Okay, the yellow line is the actual level of inflation. In general, people believe that now it is a good time to buy a durable good when they perceive that the prices are low. See, for example, the black line. Okay, a small share of households report prices will increase as a reason to have a positive spending attitude. See the red line. Okay, but in times of high inflation, we observe a completely different pattern. Okay, a large share of households report prices will increase as a reason to buy a durable good. For example, look at the late 70s or early 80s, a time period with double-digit inflation. Okay, around 70% of households report prices will increase as a reason to have a positive spending attitude. We observe a similar pattern in the post-COVID inflation period. Okay. Then I use the cross-section differences in inflation expectations. And to isolate the intertemporal substitution channel, I create a dummy variable indicating whether the household report that now it is a good time to buy a durable good because prices will increase. Okay, it has to be. It is a good time because prices will increase. The dummy equals 0 if the household provide a different reason to support a positive spending attitude of it, or if the household believes that now it is a bad time to buy a durable good. Okay. Then I regress this dummy on inflation expectations, and I do it again in levels and using 6 months revisions. I get that households with high inflation expectations are more likely to say that now it is a good time to buy a durable good because prices will increase. This correlation remains statistically significant even after controlling by household fixed effects. And the correlation is stronger in times of high inflation. Okay. The last channel is the impact of inflation expectations on nominal interest rate expectations, right? Then, I do the same as always. For some waves, I elicit nominal interest rate expectations before and after the information treatments. And then I run a regression of the posterior nominal interest rate expectations on the posterior inflation expectations. And I get that, the coefficient on the posterior inflation expectation is 0. Okay. So this is sad for us, right? Households do not associate changes in inflation expectations to changes in nominal interest rate expectations. Okay, I think that I'm running out of time, right?
Yeah, we are quite flexible, so you can run a little, maybe a couple of minutes more. Than, yeah, but then here it's kind of even. You think about if the inflation expectation goes up, how would the interest rate change, right? If you go from like a fee sharing effects, then like keeps the real interest rate does not change. If inflation expectation goes up, the interest rate should go up. But on the other hand, if you believe that the Fed will react to the inflation expectation change, then when inflation expectation change increases, the Fed should also raise the interest rate to fight against the inflation, right? So this, right? So it depends. It also depends.
I can tell you a sad story. Okay, basically in Nielsen, I have a question that allows me to understand if households are able to understand a real interest rate. Okay. For example, we give to them a number for nominal interest rate, okay, a number for expected inflation, and then we ask them to compute the real interest rate, okay?
Oh, they don't answer.
No one is providing the right answer, okay? If you think about this, in reality, people understand if I ask to my grandmother, okay, she understands if something is cheap or if something is expensive.
Right.
Yeah, and in this case, for example, you want to buy a laptop, and you think that the price of a laptop is gonna rise in the future. Then, if you have the money, you prefer to buy today. Okay. And my wife is Serbian, and the inflation rate in Serbia was a pretty high in the 90s, and she told me that during that time people used to buy durables to protect their wealth, basically.
$, okay. Yeah.
Okay, I don't have time to talk about the model, but just to conclude, okay. In my paper, I show you that there is a negative relationship of inflation expectations and durable spending in times of low inflation. And in times of high inflation, there is a positive relationship. Now, should we care about this? Are my results relevant? And the answer is yes, because my results have important implications for monetary policy, and in particular for how the central bank should manage expectations. Rising inflation expectations in times of low inflation can depress economic activity. So policies that operate through expectation channels, like quantitative easing or forward guidance, may be less effective. Also, rising inflation expectations in times of high inflation can be dangerous because it may lead households to spend more, pushing prices up, and potentially launching an inflation spiral. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for coming in a Saturday. Okay.
Yes.
You are nice people.
Yeah. Thank you for presenting the paper on Saturday. Any other questions? If there's no other questions, so let's just conclude here today. Many thanks to both Bernardo and George for their wonderful presentations. I really wish you have a successful job search this year, and I'm quite confident on that. And tomorrow we will have our final day of the Rising Star Seminar. We will have Ningxuan Wu from Harvard University and Federico Minardi from University of Chicago to present their job market papers. So I hope to see you again tomorrow. Let's just conclude here today. Have a good night.